My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Arik here, and head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and even though version 3 only released a few weeks ago, here we are with the next developer diary, because something massive has happened behind the scenes in the modding community of Divide and Conquer, and it's not going to be a secret, so I thought I might as well get feedback as early as humanly possible before whatever the next version down the line is. But before we kick off with that, the other change, of course, was that the Total War Submod, or the Sandbox campaign, was released at the weekend, and there'll be a link in the description for the downloader for that. But something that I've already seen questions about since releasing the Submod video anyway, is once you go into alternate campaigns, you have to click on that before you click continue. If you do not click on that before you click continue, then it will be wrong. So you must click on that and then continue, and you'll know you've done it right because there'll be no victory conditions. If you don't click on that and you click continue, it just runs, if I can show it, I'm fairly certain. Yes, it just runs the normal campaign. So you must click on that. And there'll be multiple of those in future. But anyway, let's dive onto the campaign map then and see the changes. Welcome then to the campaign, and this is the change. Now your feedback is welcome, but of course you're going to need a very strong argument to convince us to change what has taken hours to do thus far, and that is that Imladris and Linden have been merged back together. The High Elves of Linden and Imladris now rise. And I kept the little messages at the beginning because we've also completely overhauled essentially the way that the single faction now actually works. And a recruitment guide now pops up at the very beginning of the campaign for you to run through the changes, but I'm going to talk through those in a moment anyway. So, an overview of the faction then. They are now called the High Elves, although this is subject to change. What also is subject to change is their faction colour. At the minute it is Imladris blue, even though, well, I personally would rather it were Linden purple so it didn't clash with Ered Luin or Angmar or indeed Dale or anyone else who has blue colouring, given that purple doesn't exist on the map otherwise, apart from Dorwinion, which is very minor and miles away. So they're blue. Your faction leader is now Elrond, who's had a bit of a name change. Please do note that we are still early doors with this, so you're going to see some bugs. This is a developer diary, of course, not a finished product. But Elrond is now called High Lord Elrond, no longer Law Master. It wasn't really fitting now that he's back in charge of a full realm. And the faction heir is Lord Eladan. Also introduced is a new family tree, with obviously Elrond there, Eladan and Elra here, who I've married off to the fictitious daughters of Círdan, although he doesn't appear in the tree, but they're his daughters, so there's linking there. And Galdor is married to Arwen in this. I appreciate if you play as the Northern Dunedain, then Arwen, of course, marries Aragorn, but if you play as Imladris, it's impossible to include Aragorn on the family tree, because he's the faction leader of the Northern Dunedain. So Arwen has just married someone else. I was going to potentially, I was going to make up a sister for Elrond, but of course Elrond is famously one of a twin, and they don't have a sister, so it would have been a real stretch to the lore. I appreciate we do that in various places, but that one was one I just couldn't abide, because I was going to marry basically Elrond's sister to Círdan so that Círdan could be in the tree, but I didn't in the end. So anyway, they got a faction, family tree. The victory conditions have changed as well. They now have very, very simple ones in the long campaign, in that you only need to hold 10 regions. So it's not about domination, it's about defeat. So 10 regions, which is basically nothing. I mean, you've already got 4 at game start, so that's an absolute doddle. But you must defeat Mordor and Isengard, and you must hold Mithlond, Barad-dûr, and Imladris. So you don't need to hold Isengard, so you can beat them and move on, but you do need to hold Barad-dûr to hold the victory conditions. So your overall victory conditions are to take Mordor. If you play in the short campaign, it's 10 regions and just defeat Isengard, and you don't have to hold anywhere. So it's 10 and Isengard for the short campaign. There's been a complete overhaul to their roster and the way that they play, but so far the roster, I think some of the visuals are set up, so you might see them in the second half, but my understanding is that the units have only had their names changed thus far. But the bodyguards of the units, so these names might mean nothing to you, but I'll talk you through the names in a moment, but Elrond now has Gil-galad's company as his bodyguard, which is unique to him. They are the old Noldarine Guard. Eladan and Elrahir now have Amanya Rangers as their bodyguards, who are the old Imladris city rangers. They are now mounted, both of them. Círdan remains with Mithlond nobles in Mithlond, and Galdor and Gildor, and this is what the faction generals will look like on the battle map, but Galdor and Gildor now have the new generic lords who are called Calaquendi lords. Because they are neither Falas nor are they Noldor, they're a mix of them all, and so Calaquendi is light elves, those who have seen the light, which applies to those that actually made it to Aman, and is sometimes applied to those that made it to the shores of Beleriand and saw the light from afar. So it seemed fitting. So they have Calaquendi lords. So the roster is then a little different. So at the very, very beginning, units you will definitely be able to get are the Dunedain Scouts, Dunedain Wardens, and they come from the Dunedain camp. That remains unchanged. You have, however, lost Dunedain Cavalry. So you only get these two, and they both come early doors, and they actually will make up Imladris, certainly in Imladris, a bulk of your roster for a little while. Then your recruitment is now broken down into two types of barrackses. The first is called the Teleri Barracks, which looks like the archery range, and it upgrades to look like a bigger archery range. To the Royal Barracks. You'll note the description is not done yet. TBD means to be done. I know that's fairly obvious, but some people won't know that. So you've got Teleri Barracks, which trains your Teleri units, which is, they're not called Teleri, they're now called Lindar and Sindar. So the Sindar units remain unchanged. Sindar Spearmen, Sindar Archers, and Sindar Axemen. I changed their names in the files, so we need to rename their portraits. But so from the... Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's start with the lower tier barracks first. That makes more sense. So, from the Teleri Barracks, you can train Lindar Guards, Lindar Bowmen, and Lindar Mariners. Those, again, are unchanged. They are the old Teleri Guards, Teleri Bowmen, and Lindar Mariners remain unchanged, but again, the name has changed. And Linden Longspears. Now, Linden Longspears only come from Forlond, Harlond, and Mithlond. Linden Mariners only come from the coast, but Lindar Guards and Bowmen come anywhere that you can build the Teleri Barracks. However, the Teleri Barracks can only be built in a region that has a water course running through it. Now, I'm not picky with the requirements for water course, so pretty much any region that has a river bordering it, cutting into it, or anything like that will be able to build the barracks. But certain ones, if it's only a minor aspect, like, for example, Barketta cannot build a Teleri Barracks because it doesn't border Lake Evendim, and that little stretch of river there doesn't really count. But do note that 163 out of 199 regions have been designated as a water region, meaning that you can get the Teleri units basically everywhere. But there are certain places, nearest to you is Mitchell Delving and Shire Westmarch and Southern Ered Luin, but those places won't get it. But anyway, the Teleri Barracks is built where water is, basically. And you get, as I say, the 3 Lindar units from the lower tier, and the Linden Longspears in Mithlond only. Then when you upgrade to the second tier, which requires the Barracks event, you then get the 3 Sindar units. So Spearmen, Archers, and Axemen. And again, they're restricted by the Barracks. So the Barracks can only be built where there's water, but the units can train everywhere. Do note that Lindar units train fastest in grassland regions, then slightly slower in mountains and forest, and then terrible in deserts. Sindar, however, are fastest in forests, but then slightly slower in mountain and grassland, and then terrible in deserts. So that's the first barracks. You'll note that the Teleri do not give you any cavalry, so you've got no cavalry coming from Mithlond, and you'll need to remember that in a moment, because when we jump to the Noldor barracks, there are 2 tiers of this as well. So there's Noldor Guard Hall and Noldor Barracks. And from the Guard Hall, you get Amanyar Riders, Amanyar Swordmasters, and Amanyar Rangers. So the Amanyar Rangers are the old Imladris City Rangers. They are Archer Cavalry. They are also the bodyguard of Eladan and Elrahir. Amanyar Riders are the old Noraturno Cavalry, but they are all going to have a different design. But they're the old Noraturno Cavalry. So, and again, a cavalry unit, 2 cavalry units from the Noldor Barracks. And Amanyar Swordmasters are the old Tulkas' Faithful. So a little bit of a name change and purpose change. But the Noldor Barracks, this is where it gets a little interesting. The Noldor Barracks can only be built once you have captured Ostinethil. So you need to take Eregion before you can train any of the Noldor units, which is a nice little change, if you ask me. That gives you incentive to actually go down and get the Noldor Eregion. So once the Barracks event then hits, you can build the second tier of the Noldor Barracks, which gives you Noldarine Archers, Noldarine Defenders, and Noldarine Veterans. Noldarine Archers are the old Elder Rinway Archers, but they will have a different design. Noldarine Defenders are going to be a slightly new one, which is a sword and shield version of the old Elder Rinway. And Noldarine Veterans, I'm afraid some will hate this, some will like it, are going to be a double-headed glaive-wielding unit to just chuck a little bit of fantasy in there and make a unit that's just not a standard spearman or swordman. Now, these three units are going to have the design of silver and red, made famous by the Hobbit movies, and currently in the game on the Imladris Pikemen and the Noldarine Guard. So that model, that design, is going to the three Noldarine units, which come from the second tier of the Noldor Barracks. But that's not all. The Noldor Barracks. So not only do you need to get Eregion to get the Noldor Barracks, but it can only be built in mountain and grassland regions. So you cannot build the Noldor Barracks in forests or deserts. Now, I know that you'll be possibly worrying about this, but don't, because of the 199 regions, I believe 20 to 25 of them are designated as forests. So you will be able to build this barracks basically everywhere, but Camath Bryn is a key location where you can't, for example. I will endeavour to go through and update every single green book so that they actually are accurate. Because, for example, Imladris is actually a mountainous province, but it's listed there as forest. So we will go through and make those correct, specifically for this, so that you know what you're doing when you're playing as the Noldor. However, that is still not all for Imladris. So far, you will only be able to build Teleri units where there is water running through your regions. You'll only be able to build Noldor units where in mountains and grassland after capturing Ostin Ethel. But if you lose Imladris, you are no longer able to build the Noldor Barracks, nor are you able to train any of the units from it. So if you've already built one of these barracks and then lose Imladris, none of these units will be available. And if you haven't built the barracks in whatever region and you lose Imladris, the barracks becomes unavailable. But worry not, because as soon as you reclaim Imladris, the barracks and the units come back. The same, as I'm sure you were expecting, is true of the Teleri. So if you lose Mithlond, you cannot train Teleri nor build the Teleri barracks. This is, of course, reflective of the fact that in Divide and Conquer we're in an almost alternate legendarium. And the High Elves have this time opted to stay and fight the Shadow. That's the difference in DaC from the actual storyline. However, should you lose one of the key locations of those remaining peoples, so the Teleri are mostly focused in Lindon, i.e. around Mithlond, and the Noldor are mostly focused in Imladris with their now king, not king, Elrond. So by losing those places, those peoples lose heart and begin to sail west. However, in reclaiming them, many of them will then be turned back onto the purpose, and they will continue fighting. However, or not however, rather, but really, this is more a kind of facet just to make sure that a human player has to have Imladris and Mithlond. Whilst there is, I think, a good backstory to it, and it would make you really want to hold on to Imladris against the onslaught of the Misty Mountains, it also stops you being able to just say, well, to hell with Imladris, I'm going to evacuate and play as Lindon, or to hell with Lindon, I'm going to evacuate and play as Imladris. Because if you do either of those things, you lose 50% of your roster. So there we are. Now, there are some additional units, as I'm sure you are aware. First of all, the Mithlond nobles remain unchanged. They come from Mithlond. Obviously, you need Mithlond to train them because it's the only place they come from. So losing Mithlond loses Mithlond nobles. Eregion smiths come from Eregion once you have rebuilt the Gwaith y Myrdain, of course. And they are just as they always were, so you need Eregion in order to get them. But there are also two extra units that were previously Eldarinway Lancers and Imladris Pikes, and they are now Eldarinway Tirano and Eldarinway Roquen. I don't know Quenya, so I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. So the Eldarinway Tirano are the old Imladris Pikes. They are now Eldarinway Guards, which is what Tirano means. They have the golden armour that is reminiscent, of course, of the prologue of The Lord of the Rings. We opted to keep the golden version, not the Lindon blue version. So your gold units will indicate your very finest units. So the Eldarinway Tirano will be basically the game's best pike unit. They will be unbelievably good. They are copied with pulled with the Eldarinwe Rohwen, which will be the old Eldarinwe Lancers, but probably slightly buffed. And they will also be Glorfindel's bodyguard when he joins you on the now 65th turn, not the 40th turn. So he comes with the Barracks event. There's an addition though, because the Eldarinwe Tierno and Rohwen will train from Imladris at a rate of 1 every 50 turns. Unless you rebuild the Gwaith I Myrdain, at which point they will then come from the second tier of the Noldor Barracks everywhere. So there's a big focus now certainly for the Noldor in reclaiming Eregion. It's a big feature and facet of their game. Eregion should be it's kind of like the springboard of which you will use to conquer the world. And for Linden, there's just that, keeping that like focus toward water, really. That was the purpose. So keeping them focused on waterways, etc. Now, the water thing is certainly up for change and may well be. No, I don't mean it will be removed, but I mean it might be changed to only be major water sources, such as the Gwathlo River, for example, and then further on the Bruinen, lakes such as Lake Evandeem and Lake Berzicool, and obviously that river running and the Anduin. But it might stay as just every river, as long as there is water there. The Lindar are willing to train from there. There we are. So got through all of that. I should have said as well, the Noldor units will train faster in mountain provinces. They can be trained from either mountain or grass, but they will train fastest in mountains. And that is everything thus far about the new High Elven nation. Now, we've already had some rumblings about renaming the faction so that High Elves is not the answer, but I challenge you to find a better name than High Elves, and I mean that honestly, because if you do, I'd love to use it. But of course, this is Linden geographically, and the peoples that populate this area are mostly of Sindar, or at least are of Teleri origin. Teleri being obviously one of the 3 overall clans of all elves. So every elf is either a Teleri, a Noldor, or a Vanyar. And Imladris, of course, is the Noldor region, but Imladris is the name of the region, or really it's the name of the town. The region is called the Hidden Valley, and these are the Noldor peoples. So the name, without being ridiculously lengthy, I can't see how it could be anything other than High Elves. I mean, you could have the United Kingdom of Linden and Eregion, for example, or Linden and the Noldor, or something along those lines, but it's just, you're getting really mouthy. It's a mouthful to say, and so I'm not wholly convinced. But there we are. Anyway, that's everything that has happened so far towards the new High Elven faction. So, some of you will be wondering, what about the twins roaming around the world script? And basically that is not going to happen. In thinking about the twins, part of the reason why I suggested merging the 2 factions is because the twin script I don't think would have done anything to make Imladris all that fun, save for possibly the first time you played it. You might think, oh, this is interesting, I've got to roam around the world to get my units. But then the second time you played it, you'd be like, oh god, I've got to go all the way over there just to be able to train my elites, for example. And I think it would, in the end, annoy and bore more people than it would solve problems. And Imladris and Linden's rosters were so akin to one another, it was just so difficult to differentiate them properly. And it would have required quite the overhaul. And we, of course, were running out of unit space anyway. We only had 2 free unit spaces. And Imladris has a very small roster. Linden didn't have a particularly small one, but it wasn't huge. And it was just going to be a bit tricky to really give either of those factions anything interesting. Now, I know we've always said that Linden is the beginner faction, and I appreciate that is still a thing, sort of, but really it was a cop-out. We couldn't think of what to do to Linden. They're so far away from trouble that it's such an easy campaign that basically we just said they're the beginner faction and never bothered with them. And in Imladris, we were just always coming up trumps with how to make their campaign interesting, trying to balance the fact that the Noldor should be really rare with the fact that really rare units make a campaign boring. So overall, it was felt that by merging these 2 factions, we might be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Sorry, Peter. Peter, however you say it. I know they want us to say something other than kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but anyway, that's totally tangential. But so we felt that merging them solves both problems. And so now, as playing as Linden, you also have the unique facet in that you're the only faction who has a split realm. So you've got the relative safety of Linden, which will get you money, for example. You'll be building up economically, but you're quite far away from your actual military front, which is Imladris. We also felt that, of course, the AI does not handle split nations all that well. That is very well known, and was a big reason why DaC originally split Erebor and Ered Luin. Not necessarily to create more factions, but because they played so poorly. But Linden and Imladris never do anything anyway, so we just could not make the situation worse. They never ever do anything. We constantly get messages, how can you make the elves less passive, etc, etc. And there was nothing really we could do because the units cost too much money that the AI just stagnates itself. So by merging them, we're not going to make the situation worse. They will probably remain relatively passive, but so be it, they were already passive. So it didn't matter all that much. So that was a counter to that argument. But anyway, there we are then. I think that's everything to talk about Linden, or Imladris, or indeed the High Elves as they are now called. You are almost certain to have questions. Many people will hate this change, I'm sure, and many people will treat it like we've literally just burnt a hospital to the ground because people take things so ridiculously over the top. But I'm welcome to hear your feedback, as long as it's constructive and not just foaming at the mouth because your favourite faction has been absolutely ruined by these morons, which is how I assume people talk when they're annoyed. So anyway, do leave your feedback, questions, and we'll try and get round to answering them. Of course, the icon is going to be updated, and little things like that will change. Let me know if you'd rather they were purple or blue. But do, as I say, unless you've got like an absolutely award-winning argument, the change is going to happen. We're not going to bring Imladris back. So if you are really trying to advocate for that, we've already had a lengthy discussion with the beta testers, and they've provided many arguments and counter-arguments, and testers have provided arguments and counters. So we've gone over everything already, but the change obviously is now done, as I'm showing to you all here. So anyway, feedback welcome. A few other changes, of course, have happened since version 3 release, and I can just talk through them before we jump over to see a few new unit additions, one of which I think everyone is going to absolutely love. But do note that for Angmar in future, Iron Crown warriors and halberdiers will now take 2 turns to train, so that will slow down Angmar's quite simple campaign a little bit. And Mount Graham Raiders and Mount Graham Marauders now have a higher upkeep cost, because previously it was actually an error at how cheap they were. So they've been made more costly. But those are the only changes to the campaign map. But there are some wonderful changes going on with the Northern Dunedain in preparation of their reuniting with Gondor. And I can jump over to the battle map now and show you those preparations. So here we are on the battle map with, of course, changes to the Northern Dunedain in preparation of the reunited kingdom. So first change is that the Dunedain men-at-arms, who used to look like this, now look like this until you become the reunited kingdom, at which point they then take on the famous Arnorian armor style. So they have been obviously degraded to look like rangers, which is pretty much the process across the Northern Dunedain roster, really. Everything that looked Arnorian is now being locked behind the reunited kingdom, and everything else is remaining or being made ranger-ish, is the description we have so far. So another one akin to that are the Blade Masters, who, when they upgrade,
Swords Rangers,
now look like that. So they upgrade to looking again like the new Arnorian theme. This, of course, is all, I say again, for the reunited kingdom. There they are standing in rows. Another unit are the Dunedain Cavalry,
we Dunedain will fight for you.
who stand like that and then upgrade
Ready yourselves.
to look like that. So you get a wonderfully uniformed plate mail roster. And then finally then the Grey Company, which is the Piece de la Résistance, and ideally should be showed way down the line, but they look so good, and Hummingbird has poured everything into it, and it shows, because they are phenomenal. So, and of course they are only Aragorn's bodyguard, or are they? I'll come to that in a moment. But the Grey Company,
I will go with you to the end.
who are of course Aragorn, they are only his bodyguard, but when he becomes King Aragorn of the reunited kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, his men upgrade thusly.
Fear the blade of Elendil.
And they look phenomenal. Now, I believe that the base of the model is taken from Reforged, but they just look epic. The detail is so good on the mail, on the chest there. And courtesy of Mats, we have this crisp and wonderful star on the shields. So it was the old Arthedain shields and the but the heraldry has been changed to just the famous large star. And they look epic. And the reason I say they are not just for Aragorn is because the unit model is too good to waste. And so when you rebuild the House of Kings, and also you rebuild Osgiliath, and possibly in Tharbad as well, you will get a version of this unit that has a halberd. So while this one is restricted to just Aragorn, and once he dies you lose the visuals, that's why another unit using these exact visuals has been added, but they have a halberd instead. So they won't have any shields. Now, I was also going to show you the 3 Amanyar units of Imladris, or the High Elves, sorry, who have been edited already, but I, foolishly, of course, have not assigned their ownership to Saxons in the files. So they are all Silver Surfers at the moment, but you can get a general idea of what they will look like. Obviously, they have no textures at the moment, but you might recognise the unit model from the old Imladris City Rangers. So the Noraturno design has gone out the window. So these are Amanyar Riders, and they have that lower tier sort of Ranger design that the Rangers already had. There they are, Amanyar Rangers. I promise in the next developer diary I will have fixed this and you can see what they actually look like. But just to get a general idea of what their model looks like, those are the Amanyar Sword Masters. And the Eldarinway look that is going is this one. So all Eldarinway will now be golden, and they are only the top 2 elite units, the Eldarinway Roquen and the Eldarinway Tierno, i.e. the Pike unit, these ones here, Eldarinway Tierno, and the Imladris, the Lancers. I don't think I used Lancers. No, I didn't. Those are just the upgraded version of the riders, because they do have they have a visual change when they upgrade. As you can see, they get helmets and they get a pauldron, I think, or armor on the arms. But anyway, just to give you some context of what I was talking about, your standard 3 elites, the Noldorin Defenders, Veterans and Archers, will now look like this unit here, and the absolute uber highest tier Pikes and Cavalry will look like Eldarinway but in gold. Also, Gil-galad's company, which is Elrond's unique bodyguard, only he has it, they will be in the golden Eldarinway as well. So that basically the golden Eldarinway design will now give clear indication that you are using your finest units, and the silver and red that we see from the Hobbit films are just your standard elites. And there we are, that's the roster. Now, just before we go, I'm sure some of you will have a little question about the names. So I'll give you a little bit of an elven lore breakdown. As I say, every elf is either a Teleri, a Noldor, or a Vanyar. Vanyar are all in a man. They did not come to Middle-earth. Teleri are everything other than Noldor. The Noldor have no subsects. They have no divisions underneath Noldor. Whereas Teleri do break down, as you are all very aware, into things like Nandor, Lindar, Sindar, Sylvan, and Avari. And for our purposes, we are dealing with the Lindar. The Lindar are elves of the sea, but they are also called song elves. It's a name you don't see very often, but the name literally means like those who sing or singers. And it's a name attributed to a subsect of Teleri who lived in Beleriand back in the days gone by. Was it me, or did the horses just disappear? I think they might have done. And they, of course, fled Beleriand when it fell, and they lived in Lindon. The Sindar are, of course, the Grey Elves who inhabited Beleriand. Much of the Silmarillion is about the Sindar. Almost everyone in that book is a Sindar, apart from the Noldor who come back to Middle-earth. But all of the natives are mostly Sindar. They're the most common elves in Beleriand in the First Age. And they also, of course, fight for you after the fall of Beleriand. They now live in Lindon, where they fight for you. Although certain Sindar, of course, made their way over to Mirkwood and Lothlorien, where they now famously rule over the Sylvan Elves. You also will now be meeting the new name Amanyar, and Amanyar is literally just those elves who made it to Aman. It is just another way of describing Noldor, but because we've already got Noldor as a name, we didn't want 6 Noldor units, so Amanyar are the lower tier and Noldorin are the upper tier. Now, a point on Noldorin as well is that Noldorin doesn't really describe a unit, it is an adjective. Not an adjective. I don't really know the meanings of those words. It might well be an adjective, but you could describe a dagger or a sword or a house of being, this is a Noldorin dagger, as in a dagger of the Noldor. So, strictly speaking, the units should be called Noldor archers, because they're not Noldarine archers doesn't really make grammatical sense, but Noldarine sounds so much cooler, so that's why we went for that. And hardly anyone knows Elvish, so other than me explaining it there, no one will really know that that change has been made. There's our super elite ones. Look, they're getting absolutely massacred by the Emanya Swordmasters. But anyway, there we are. So much is already happening in preparation for future versions, and I'm sure the High Elves, therefore, are probably going to make it onto the channel at some point, because they're going to be, along with the Reunited Kingdom, the major focus of the next version. But until we speak again, dear friends, I look forward to reading all of your comments, and until then, Navair Naden Perimad Melonin, and farewell.